A huge fourth quarter collapse, a big missed opportunity for the Philadelphia 76ers. They fall to the Kings and rob themselves of winning 5 straight. We're going to break it down in just a moment.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Philadelphia 76ers fall 113-107. We're your hosts, Keith Pompey and Kayla Santiago on the Locked On 76ers Podcast Network. And you can also join us if you want to take a look at the daily newsletter. It's free on lockedondaily.com. So make sure you go check that out today if you want all things Philadelphia 76ers. So we have to start off with a big-time collapse. Then we'll go more into what Paul George was able to deliver besides the last few minutes where he really struggled, and some really good pivotal bench pieces in that game. But Keith, overall, my biggest takeaway, you can't have 9 turnovers in the fourth quarter. They didn't score in the final 3 minutes. They had terrible possessions. And this looked like a team that decided, okay, the last 5 minutes, they got this. They're going to win. They came out and just didn't play at the high level they've been playing all game long. They completely threw away that game and a huge missed opportunity. What's your biggest takeaway from the huge collapse there last night?
I mean, they just can't close. I mean, they can't close a game. I mean, when you look at it, we can say that, they threw the game away, but when you look at it, I mean, Paul George only got one shot in the fourth quarter. He played 7 minutes, 19 seconds. I mean, you look at Tyrese Maxey. Tyrese Maxey had 9 of his 27 points. Paul George had 30. But it just seemed like they just couldn't deal with the pressure. And it just seems that, when you have big time games, big time players step up in the fourth. De'Aaron Fox steps up. Malik Monk steps up. Tyrese Maxey, he had 9 points, but he had like 2 crucial turnovers. Paul George had 3 of them. He had a bad foul in the game. So, we look at it, the 76ers, they were rolling, they had a pretty good game. They ended up shooting 1 for 7 in the fourth quarter. It was a missed opportunity for them. And, they just looked bad down the stretch. And that was the difference in the game. Also, you say to yourself, like, you're looking at it where this is a team that shot 7 for 17 in the fourth. Here we go. They're up 9 points with 3 minutes and 3 minutes and 49 seconds left, and 3 minutes and 34 seconds left in the fourth quarter. And that was the last thing that they scored. That was the last time they scored. And it was more coming down, missing shots, turnovers. I think it was bad all the way around, because there are times where you're looking at it and you're saying, are you going to call a timeout? Are you going to get them together? Are you going to do this and that? And it just seemed like, Yabu missing a 26-foot three-pointer, Eric Gordon missing a 25-foot three-pointer. It just seemed like it was just a poor execution by the Sixers down the stretch.
It really was. And the Kings going on a 15-0 run, and they're at home. They're feeding off the home crowd. But when you look at the 76ers team, there is no excuse for Paul George passing when the shot clock is down to 0. There was nothing left in the shot clock. He gets it out. He's unaware. How can you be unaware that late in a game as a veteran in this league? That is something that you can just not pass up. I get it. He was double teamed and he clearly didn't have a good shot on him, but still, you need to be aware of the shot clock in that situation. As you alluded to, they get offensive boards. Yabu can't hit, and then Eric Gordon can't hit. Then Tyrese Maxey goes up with his super awkward trying to lay it in over his head, and it just looked like a really messy shot. And then Paul George turns it over once again, the 9th turnover coming out of the timeout on the inbound pass, but there wasn't that much time left in the game either. And it was just really, really sloppy play. Keith, this is kind of a stretch that we've talked about. The 76ers really need to win some games here, because in a few weeks or in a week and a half, they have a very tough stretch with a lot of good teams coming in and playing them. This is a game that you had in your hands and you just gave it away to the Sacramento Kings. I know Joel Embiid and Kelly Oubre weren't out there, but that doesn't matter. The 76ers, they had this one in the bag right up until they didn't. I know it's the NBA and a lot of things can change, but you can't make any excuses for sloppy play and not paying attention to the little things like a shot clock violation down the stretch.
But you know what, Kayla, I'm not going to blame Paul George as much as everybody else is. I get it. He made a mistake. I mean he owned it. But see, my thing is when you look at that fourth quarter, when you look at it beforehand, for 3 quarters, Paul George was the primary ball handler.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In the fourth quarter, became Tyrese Maxey. And what happened is Paul George only gets one shot at them. Now I get it. He did have 3 crucial turnovers, which was bad. But to me, it looked like they were out there gunning. Like it was like, how do you have this guy involved and he has 30 points through 3 quarters? He was balling. And then all of a sudden he only gets one shot at them. Like to me, it's kind of like, what were they doing? It was like, you don't do that. Like they were out there playing hero ball, and that's why they lost the game. Because then what happens is you're playing hero ball, and then you try to get a guy, get him the ball, and try to get him a little incorporated in the flow. Then he starts rushing stuff. He tries too hard. But the stuff that they did in the fourth quarter was not what they did the entire game. So again, yeah, I get it. He didn't score. He didn't do this. A lot of people are going to say stuff. But to me, it's kind of like, why did y'all switch up? Why did y'all change? And that's the reason why they lost the game. That's the reason why they lost the game.
It almost seems like Nick Nurse and company were trying to have a closer and that be Tyrese Maxey and say, okay, well, Paul George carried us through 3 quarters. Now let's go to Tyrese Maxey, make him the closer and try to finish out this game. Why are you going away from what worked? And I do agree with you on that standpoint. Now, granted, I'm not still going to give any type of thumbs up to the turnover, the shot clock violation, but why are you going away from Paul George? I understand if he's not having a great game, but he absolutely was. This is one of his best games throughout this season, especially after a little bit of the slump that he's been in. Why are you going away from what works? They're just forcing it too much. Tyrese Maxey, yes, trying to play hero ball. And we've touched on this before. When Joel Embiid isn't in the game, it seems like Tyrese Maxey feels though he has to force shots and just takes sometimes one too many shots or shots that could probably be passed up. I don't know how much of that is a Nick Nurse call or a Tyrese Maxey call. Keith, what are your thoughts? Do you think it was a coaching decision out there to make plays up for
I
Tyrese
mean,
Maxey, or Tyrese said, no, I'm going to the cup. Let's finish this game in the
I
fourth?
think it was hero ball. I mean, if you really want to be real with it, because
Mm,
when they were winning, Tyrese wasn't doing that. He was playing in the flow of the game.
right.
I'm talking about when Joel wasn't out there. It was all through Paul George. I think what happened is, Tyrese, when they opened up the fourth quarter, they had Tyrese on it in the game with 4 reserve players. He was getting his buckets. But then when Paul came back in, he kept trying to go and go 100 miles an hour and do stuff. I don't think that's the coach telling him to do that. I mean, maybe the coach tells him, I need you to attack. But I think in that type of game, you got to like go with what you were doing, right? But I think that Maxi, he came in, he had 5 in the fourth quarter. In the beginning, he scored 5 of their first 10 points. He
Right.
was he was rolling. You know what I mean? He was rolling. But then when you start bringing the other guys in, the guys who started, then you got to go back. You got to start mixing it up a little bit. That way you're keeping people honest. With their playing hero ball, it took the Kings off the hook. Like they didn't have to do as much. So I don't think that's coaching per se. I feel like Maxie was baking early on. He had five points, and then he wanted to keep it going. The problem is, though, from that point forward, he ended up with 9 points, but he scored 4 more points, once the starters came back in. So, it's one of those things where, they have to learn from this. This is a game where it was like they were up 9 with 3 minutes to play, and then all of a sudden they just shot themselves in the foot.
Complete collapse there at the end. They had the game in their hands, as we alluded to as well. It also does help when Fox puts up 35 points. Monk gets rolling as well. He had 20. DeRozan finishing with 18. And then Sabonis finishing with 17 points and 21 rebounds for the Kings. But once again, they played well, but it was also the 76ers game to lose, and that they did. So once again, they fall in this contest 113 to 107. But we've touched on a lot of Paul George, and we're going to keep on breaking down his game a little bit because throughout three quarters, it was really good to see Paul George kind of get back into his rhythm of what he can do and what the 76ers have been wanting to see him do. So don't go anywhere because when we come back, we're going to touch on that and so much more between the Philadelphia 76ers and the Kings. And talking about all these games and being able to watch the NBA games, it gets me so excited to have an opportunity to go out and go to the games and be in the atmosphere. If you watch the Kings and the 76ers game, it was absolutely lighting it up there in Sacramento. Those fans were in it. And you know where a lot of them probably got their tickets and their best deals? Through Game Time. Game Time has fantastic opportunities to get the best seats. They have super deals where you can get some really, really good deals off. In addition to the best deals, the top 15% value, they have a ton of things working out right now for the Philadelphia Eagles, the Ravens, NFL games. So if you want to go out and see those games and get your best price available, make sure you go head out to Game Time right now. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, make an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use code Locked On NBA. Once again, that's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Make sure you download Game Time today. What time is it? It is game time. All right, so Paul George kind of minusing what we were able to break down, the turnovers and the shot clock violation late in the fourth. This was his best game in quite some time when you look at it, getting out of his slump. 30 points, 4 for 7 from three-point land. Now, he did foul out, and that was something you kind of looked at as well. Keith, can you still look at Paul George's game even though the 76ers lost how they did? Because I think you can evaluate it and say he had a really good game, but does everything that happened at the end kind of take that away? Because it was good, at least through three quarters, to see him get out of that slump that we've seen him in throughout the season at this point.
Nah, you can't. Nah, like I mean, that was a wasted 30-point effort. Like I mean, I get it. Paul George was the man early on. I mean, what he had like 20 points at the half. He had 10 points in the third quarter. But I mean, to me, all that, it's hard to hype up a 30-point performance when you don't show up in the fourth quarter. Now, granted, like I said, they were gunning him out. They were doing stuff like that. But, he fouled out. He had crucial turnovers. He only got off one shot attempt. You know, Unfortunately for him, you can't hang your hat on that. I mean, the thing about it is, and another thing is kind of like the biggest question mark to me is, and I get it. I get it. You can't Joel Embiid is going to come out and he's going to score 30 something points, right? So what happens is somebody else is going to suffer. Paul George turns out to be the guy that's suffering right now. But for the life of me, they have to figure out a way to get him more involved in the game when Joel is playing, right? But at the same time, what this effort shows me is that they can't win without Joel. They need somebody out there to be a stabilizer because he and Tyrese choked, right? But at the same time, so like when you look at it, you're like, okay, Paul looks like the guy that they wanted him to look like. But at the same time, it's just like, nah, I can't, aside from that, I can't like say this was a great performance because they choked down the stretch. You know what I mean? It's like if it was Yabusele, if it was Eric Gordon, if it was, somebody else, yeah, but not when it's a 9-time All-Star, a person who, is a borderline Hall of Famer, a guy making $212 million. Nah, I can't really say, okay, he had 30 points, but he didn't do anything in the fourth. So I can't really give him I don't know. I can't like hype it up if that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's hard, right? Because you look at the situation and you say 30 is great, but nobody's going to remember that when you lose a game down the stretch and you're sitting at 13 and 18 right now in a winnable game. I mean, going forward, these are games that you really need to start coming out the other end of. And essentially, you just gave the W over to the Sacramento Kings and said, here you go in the last 3 minutes, completely take this away from us, and you go out with the win. It's crazy how big of a collapse that was for this team right now. And I saw some good things from Paul George, but I think some of the things that you look at is, okay, how much do they depend on Joel Embiid to close out a game? Paul George being in foul trouble, Paul George not knowing where the shot clock violation was happening. Those are things that he should know as a vet. So I'm not saying that there wasn't good things that you could take from this performance, but is that going to continue going forward, right? Because it's been a little streaky here for Paul George. Of course, he also falls, and then, he's on the bench with the heating pad. He seems to be okay right now, but I still can't give overall evaluations to Paul George until I see him close out games, which he didn't do last night, or I see him with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. I mean, this team right now, you look at the Sacramento Kings, they just fired their coach. It looked like the 76ers had it completely. And then all of a sudden, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, they do not show up. But Keith, we know that Joel Embiid is going to be out on back-to-back. So Paul George and Tyrese Maxey, when Joel Embiid is not there, those are the players that this team is going to look at. And they got to figure out how to win close games and close games out without Joel Embiid, because that record can't keep slipping. I know people are going to say, oh, it's just one game. Joel Embiid will be back against the Warriors, but you got 13 wins on the season. So one game isn't just one game at this point of the year.
Yeah, but not only that, I also think that one thing that they need too, a problem I think that hurt them tonight is also like the point guard position opposite
Mm-hmm.
Tyrese Maxey. I mean, they really didn't get anything from it. Kyle Lowry played 17 minutes. He was 0 for 3 shooting. He had one steal. He had one assist. And then they put Reggie Jackson out there. He played 13 minutes. He was 1 for 3 shooting, and he had three points. So when you look at these two guys, they really didn't bring what the 76ers needed to get that, the complement these guys. And then even that, when we look at Kyle, in his 17 minutes, he was a minus nine. Reggie Jackson was broke even in his 12 minutes. But, it was like it was just one of those things where I felt like they played bad, Paul did, but also they didn't get any other contributions from the point guard spot at all outside of Maxey.
Yeah, they did it. And that's something that we've kind of been touching on since Jared McCain went down, who was going to be that guy who stepped up. And it just didn't work out in the end for the Philadelphia 76ers. Paul George finishes 30 points, 8 rebounds, 6 personal fouls. He fouled out in the game, 5 assists as well, 11 for 24 for 7. But a big turnover, 2 of them having a shot clock violation and then turnover late in the game when the contest was tied. So all of that is going to be wiped away, because at the end of the day, he's a veteran in this league, and he pitched in to how the Philadelphia 76ers lost. I'm not saying he's the sole reason, because there was a hero ball, as we alluded to, missed shots, turnovers, but you can only look at that game and say, okay, this was a big step for him if they were able to come out on top. So 30 points, don't want to say it's totally wiped away, but it is a little bit because of how the collapse of the Philadelphia 76ers
But
happened.
can I say something right quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I agree that it's a big step, but also I feel like he's already shown us that he can do this,
That is
right?
true,
When
yeah.
when they don't. The problem is it's like you're playing two different styles of basketball.
Mhm.
You got one style where he's involved, another style where you're looking at him to be more of a defensive player. So it's kind of like it wasn't surprising that he had a good game through 3 quarters, but at the same time, it's like you got to be able to do this when you have Embiid on the floor, because
Right.
you're not going to go far in the postseason if you can't do it, right? So, it's like, look, he may come out, Embiid may not play against Brooklyn. If he doesn't play against Brooklyn, look for Paul George to get 35 against Brooklyn,
Yeah.
right? And what does it mean? It doesn't mean anything. Like, I hate to say that, they got to get them all together and firing on the same thing, and they have to play with higher basketball IQs, all of them. when it comes down to it, because you can't play hero ball and expect to beat a team.
You can't. And this is the time to do it, too. We're going to wait and see the status of Joel Embiid and Paul George in this game against the Warriors. But you have the Warriors, the Nets coming up, and the Suns, the Wizards, the Pelicans. Then after that, we touched on this a few days ago. You have a really tough stretch. So this is the time to start to figure out how Paul George can fit in, how he can go out. Because the one thing I did like from Paul George last night, early on especially, he was aggressive. He was going to the cup. He was taking the shots that he wanted. So yes, it's not always going to be a Paul George 30-point night, because when Joel Embiid's in the lineup, a lot of the attention goes to him. But he's got to start working that out in some aspect. And this team does. The big three needs to figure it out, because if they don't, waste any type of postseason hopes or comeback hopes alive, because it ain't going to be won by Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid alone. We've seen that year after year, and it has not worked fully, especially in the Eastern Conference with the Celtics, the Knicks, the Cavs, so on and so forth. So Paul George in this game dropping 30, the 76ers coming out in a big loss in the end there. But there were other contributions that I do want to touch on here before we send things off on Locked On 76ers. Eric Gordon able to light it up a little bit. Andre Drummond had a pretty nice stretch. But what did that all mean down the line? Well, a little bit of nothing. We'll touch on that in just a moment. And hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return to FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com. The Eagles right now are -2.5 favorites over the New York Giants, even though Saquon not going to play. The Birds still out on top. And if you think that they will be able to get that, make sure you check it out. That's America's #1 sports book. Be sure to visit FanDuel today to place all of your sports bets. No better place to do so than FanDuel. So make sure you go check it out today. All right. So Eric Gordon, 14 points, 3 for 7 from 3-point land. He's somebody I wanted to touch on because at the halftime break, he was letting it up. 11 points, 3 for 5 from 3, and he did miss a big shot down the stretch. But Keith, how did the 76ers get more players like him involved? Because you alluded to it last night, the point guard position, it was completely evaded. But you can get guys like Eric Gordon involved. You can get guys like Yabusele involved. How do they continue to do this? Because Eric Gordon, we know he's a piece that if he comes in and he's shooting lights out, then keep him in. And if not, he probably shouldn't be on the floor. But he's somebody, if he has the hot hand, you got to keep him going, because it started to die out a little bit towards that second half.
Well, I mean, I think Eric Gordon has to play a lot of minutes. And and the thing about it is, it's weird because he's an older guy. He doesn't always bring it, right? But when you bring him in and you only play him a little bit of minutes, he tends to struggle. When he played 27 minutes, he did get his rhythm. The thing is, they had him in the game for the entire fourth quarter, him and Tyrese Maxey. I feel like he probably tired out a little bit. But the thing is, you just got to find him. I mean, the ball has to swing, and you'll find him. Now, the part of the thing is, you got to understand something now. You said that it went away a little bit in the fourth quarter. Well, for 3 quarters, Paul George had was doing a lot of the ball handling. So he was starting it off swinging it. In the fourth, it wasn't a lot of that. It was a lot of those like, okay, you're going to get the ball, like bailout type of things, but it wasn't that. I just feel like you got to get him involved, right? Because what he does is he'll stretch the floor. He was shot 3 for 5 in the first half on threes. He missed his 2 3-point attempts after intermission. But I think you gotta swing the ball. Like you just can't like go to the cup, just make one pass, whatever. You got to swing the ball, get more people involved. And they did that in the first half. And in the second half, especially in the fourth quarter, you didn't have a lot of that. But what you did is when it was clutch time, after a guy isn't touching the ball, then you go to him, and 9 out of 10 times, or I should say 9 out, maybe 7 out of 10 times, they're not going to make the shot. So, so I think you got to keep them more involved and stuff like that, and you got to stop gunning.
I never understand why the 76ers do things like this down the stretch too, because I talk about it all the time on here where you look at teams like the Knicks and you look at teams like the Celtics, and they have their main guys. They have a Jason Tatum, they have a Jalen Brown, right? They have a Jalen Brunson, they have a Cat, but they get other players involved, especially when it comes to when it matters in the postseason. There's other clutch guys that could be hitting threes down the stretch that are huge for them that aren't those top names. The 76ers need to figure out how to keep that involved and when it's going good to continue on to that, because that is going to help them win postseason games. It Teams are going to know how to defend Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid. They're going to try. They're going to game plan for that. They're not necessarily going to game plan for the Kelly Oubres or the Eric Gordons or anybody else coming off the bench. Now, granted, they'll game plan for everybody, but at the same time, if you can get somebody going, those are the guys they may not expect to get the ball too much or to play that many minutes. And the 76ers consistently go away from what works, and I just don't understand it. In the fourth quarter there, they completely went away from everything that helped them win the first three quarters. And at the end of the day, those three quarters don't really matter anymore because they come out in a loss in this game. So I think I agree with you, Keith, in that standpoint. Now, obviously, if Eric Gordon's not having a good night, then you take him out. But what's the harm in keeping him in the game, letting him get a little bit more run with this team, with this unit? Now, granted, he's a little older, he's a vet, so he might get tired, so get him breaks when you need to. But you got to move the ball around a little bit more. We can't have no ISO ball, no hero ball, because as we saw last night, that turns into a loss for this team.
Yeah, well, it's two things that happened last night. I mean, the one thing that we didn't really address, it was the big thing is they didn't have Kelly Oubre.
Right.
Kelly Oubre didn't play. So that's the reason why he got a lot of minutes. Heck, that's the reason why Justin Edwards got first quarter
Yeah.
action, right? But when we talk about those other teams, you look at Boston and we look at how their style of play is. It's like they get a lot of guys behind the 3-point line and they just swing
Mhm.
it, right? But secondly, when we look at it, you know, you really don't have a point guard here. So it's hard, right? And what I mean by that is, yes, Tyrese Maxey is a point guard. He's an all-star point guard, but he's not a traditional point guard. He's like more of a scoring guard, right? And what he does is, he brings the ball up, he gets the ball to Joel Embiid, and Joel Embiid tries to swing it around. Well, when Joel doesn't play, Paul George is the guy who's typically the primary ball handler. In
Right.
an ideal world, if this was 5 years ago or whatever, it would be Kyle Lowry. And Kyle Lowry would make a point to make sure that everybody gets the ball, right? That would be his job. And unfortunately for the 76ers, Kyle Lowry's a little bit older now, right? So he doesn't play as many minutes, and they just don't have a a young point guard in his prime that's a traditional point guard. So that's the reason why we see a lot of inconsistencies. And you look at Tyrese Maxey, his best attribute is scoring the ball. He had a
Mhm.
string of 30-point games going. So, hey, look, tonight he scored what, 27? It was his 10th consecutive game with at least 20 points. So that's his contribution. So that's the reason why a lot of people don't get involved, unfortunately.
I think we've seen too Paul George, bring up the rock, and you alluded to it earlier when he was bringing up the rock. It feel like a lot of other guys were getting involved. Do you think the 76ers should stick to that when Joel Embiid is in the lineup? Because they do it sometimes, then sometimes they go away from it. And I know we're also talking about the depth of the point guard position too. It's not really there for this team, especially with Noah McCain right now. But when you look at it, when Joel Embiid comes back and it's the big three, do you, Keith, want to see Paul George more with the ball handling duties, bringing up the ball? Do you think that hurts them in size? What's your overall analysis from that standpoint?
I would like to see that, but I would like to see that. And I think we talked about that before. The
Yeah,
the only problem right now that I think that happens is that what they want to do is like they're playing two styles. Like you
right.
want to bring a Paul to do it, but also when Embiid's there, you want to do the two-man game between Embiid and Maxey, but you want Embiid to be the guy that's quarterback in the gym and everything going through him. So, it's like they have to have a talk. Like they really have to figure out what they're going to do because, yeah, you need to get more people involved. But I guess they want to do it through Embiid. But it just seems like, I don't know. I think if Embiid would have played, I think they would have won. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it just seems like tonight it was just bad. It was just bad. I mean, it was just a bad, or last night it was just a bad mix, a bad mix.
It was. I think if Embiid and Kelly Oubre did play, they definitely would have won. But at the same time, we're talking about a game that the 76ers had in their hands that they could have came out victorious, kept that momentum going, and improved their record when they do have Joel Embiid. It looks like he probably will come back against the Warriors. We'll wait and see. Of course, that's not the official report right now. But at the same time, you had it served out to you on a silver platter and you just gave it away. So the 76ers, they drop a big game, complete fourth quarter collapse in the last 3 minutes, 113 to 107 against the Kings. We'll see if they can get back in the victory column on the back-to-back and who will play against the Warriors. We'll see if Joel Embiid will be playing, if Paul George will as well, and if we'll see the big three once again out there on the court. But 76ers definitely not in favor of the victor column against the Kings. They fall once again 113 to 107. For Keith Pompey, I'm Kayla Santiago saying so long. We'll see you after the Warriors game, and we'll see if we're talking about a win next time around.